Welcome to another Klemi tutorial video. In this screencast, I'll be showing you how to hide or even make inaccessible your public service grids. A little bit of background to begin with. Klemi comes with a service manager. The service manager has a default service grid. You can find that default service grid if you come to the link over here, and this link here, the service grid. The service grid is your starting point, the default service grid. As you will have discovered if you've spent any time with Klemi, you are also able to make custom service grids. On this particular test installation, I've made an additional 3 grids which I've named, which allow a different perspective onto the same information. This is the children's service grid, this is the youth service grid, with youth leaders on it. This is the readers service grid, which just has information that's relevant to the readers. Now, again, as a default setting, Klemi allows you to share the service grid and a few other pages publicly with your congregation members in a way that doesn't require them to have admin logon. That's really useful and makes it really simple for them to access information without necessarily needing to have an account. Now, this is all relatively clearly organized in the standard interface. So here we have the service grid and the other grids under admin. That means they're the admin links. You need to be logged in to be able to access those. And all of that is then reflected also under the public links. The same idea. The public service grid is simply a copy of the default service grid that we saw before, only without any editable element to it. And the other grids here with the unlocked padlock are also public versions of the earlier grids. So for example, let's have a look at the public readers grid. It shows just the information that's relevant to the readers, but again, you can't adapt this, you can't change it. It is fixed and uneditable. Now, for many people that will be plenty good enough. They have public links that correspond to all the private links, the admin links that they have. However, in some circumstances, you might want to hide or at least or disable some of these pages so that they are completely inaccessible for those who don't have a login. Now, that can be achieved in the following way. We go down to settings. This is within the Service Manager. And you'll come to a page like this, which shows all the pages that are publicly accessible within the Service Manager. So as you can see from here, we have the default routes. Those are 3 pages which by default come with every Klemi installation and have a publicly accessible link to them. So when you first get your Klemi installation, there will be a This Sunday page, which always updates and it's publicly available, a Service Planner page, which is also publicly available in a non-editable form, and a default service grid, which will also be available publicly in a non-editable form. In addition, any custom grids that you create will also have a corresponding public page. We've just had a look at those. Now, this settings page allows you to change that. So, for example, let's say that you have a default service grid which you're happy that it should be accessible at this address and you're happy to leave public. But let's say you don't want to share every single one of your grids publicly. Let's say some of your grids have additional information that you don't want to make publicly available. You could set those grids either to being disabled or private. Now, what does this mean? Well, if we copy this link here, you'll see that the URL is as follows. The URL has the standard domain, test.Klemi.co, Service Manager, Public Services Grid, Children. That's the name of the grid. Now, that is obviously a very easy URL to share with people, but it's quite guessable as well, and therefore it might be quite easy for someone to have a go at guessing it and finding it, and for most people that won't be an issue, but there may be some situations where for whatever reason you don't want to make that information publicly accessible. In that case, going back to our settings, you can choose to make that link private. Now that's just a single click there, and once it's been made private, if we now highlight this text and paste it into here, you will see that it has changed. In addition to the URL that was there before, a long access code has been added to it. This means anyone who isn't in possession of this precise text is highly unlikely to be able to guess the URL of that page. In other words, only those people with whom you share this specific link, and probably copy it in an email, only those people will be able to access it. The link is still not behind a login of any kind, but it is really non-guessable, obfuscated, as they sometimes call it in the trade. Now, it may be that you want to do the same for the youth grid as well, for whatever reason, but you're actually happy for the readers grid to stay public. Now, let's say that there's a grid which does have more sensitive information on it for whatever reason, and you really don't want anyone to be able to see it unless they are logged in, unless they have a proper admin account. Well, in which case you simply move that grid to being disabled. When a grid is disabled, you cannot access the grid using the standard URL. So if I now take the URL that we've had there on that page and paste it into my URL bar, I'll get that screen, not authorized. I can't get through to it. Each of these links here, this Sunday, the service planner, the default service grid, and any custom grids can be set to either be public, private, or disabled. And that way you have full control over how much of your different service grids are visible to and on what level they're visible to your congregation and others. Of course, the decisions that you make on this need to be a balance between usability and security. In general, if you can keep something open, keep it open, because it will be much easier for your congregation members to use.